Good evening once again. It is another Marlins Monday. My name is Eric Wiedeke. You can follow me on X/Twitter at Eric Wiedeke. And this week it is a little bit more of a less than exciting week for the Miami Marlins as they go 2-4, dropping consecutive series to the Cardinals and the Blue Jays as they are just beaten up by the Birds last week. Before we do go any further, I do just want to remind you guys to like, comment, and subscribe to this video and all other videos done on the 5 Reasons Sports YouTube channel. Helps grow what we do over at 5 Reasons Sports. Fantastic coverage of the Hurricanes, Marlins, Panthers, Dolphins, Inter Miami, anything South Florida sports. You can find it there on the 5 Reasons Sports YouTube channel. But I do want to cut to the chase here and get into it this week because there is still quite a bit to talk about, even though it seems like the Marlins season is kind of going down with a whimper rather than a bang here, as they are 61-69, 8 games under here as of Monday, August 25th. And it's only fitting that as August draws to a close, we bring our attention to Augustine Ramirez, the Marlins catcher. And listen, I mean, maybe that's a little mean-spirited, and I don't mean to be to a guy that's still, just 23 years old. And listen, I think he can still be a very good baseball player. I just don't think that's a catcher. I don't think that's where it's going to happen. I think you've seen enough out of him defensively at catcher to know that, even if he does get better, he would have to get leaps and bounds better just to go from where he is now to, playable defensively on a consistent basis. And I'm not here to pile on the guy. I want to see him and them turn this around for him because I still believe in the potential. I still think there's a very good baseball player there. I know that he struggled with the bat, but I think that the struggles with the bat have followed the struggles with the glove. You look at Augustine Ramirez, and he's two different players. There's Augustine Ramirez, the DH, and there's Augustine Ramirez, the catcher. Augustine Ramirez, the catcher this season, has played in 53 games. He's hitting .211 with 5 homers, 23 runs batted in, a .624 OPS. When DHing, though, he's hitting .254, slugging .512, and .814 OPS, 13 homers in 52 games, 34 runs batted in. The guy's on pace for pretty much 40 homers, 100 runs batted in as a DH, and he's not a very good offensive player as a catcher, put it lightly. We've seen this. We've seen this with Xavier Edwards. Xavier Edwards was playing a very demanding defensive position at shortstop. He was trying to make it work, even though it wasn't his best defensive position. And he's moved over to second baseman, and he's been a much better hitter since. He's slumping of late, but generally speaking, that's just been what it is with him. I think we can see the same thing with a guy like Augustine Ramirez. And I can already hear everyone online, he's 23, he's too young to become a full-time DH. You don't do that with guys at his age. Okay, yes, point taken. There's other options than catching and DHing. He can play first base. It's a much less demanding position for him than catching. Whatever effort and work he has to put in, catching is time that he's not getting to put in the batter's box. where he can make a positive impact for this Marlins team. Because I think the best you can ever hope for Agustin Ramirez as a catcher is that one day he becomes a neutral for you. And I just don't think that that's – I don't think that that's where his or their energy is best served at this point. I understand catcher is a very valuable position, and if you can get an advantage by having a bat, a really solid bat at catcher, I understand the advantage that can present you. But when the difficulties and some of the issues with playing a strenuous position defensively carries over into the batter's box, well, all of a sudden you have a guy that has a hard time catching and can't really hit either. And listen, again, I think Agustin Ramirez is in a good position for next season if the Marlins are willing to just bite the bullet and say, okay, well, Agustin Ramirez is not a catcher, because he's not. I don't think he's ever going to get to that point where you're comfortable with him behind the plate. And again, like I fully understand some of the arguments. He's a guy that has a really, really, really below average batting average on balls that he puts in play. This year's batting average on balls in play is like 250. Major league average is 300. For a guy that hits the ball as hard as Ramirez, I'm not saying that he would be a full 50 points better in most seasons to where he's hitting 280 instead of 230. I don't think so. But I think you can definitely see a world where, you get similar, if things play out almost in an identical way where he's hitting 250, 260, and you're fine with that. But again, I think all of this is just being compounded by you're asking him to play a position defensively that he's just not great at. I don't know how else to put it with him. I think you have guys like Joe Mack coming up. I think you even have guys like Ryan Ignoffo coming up, who had a really nice run at Double-A this past season. Once he got the call there. So with Ramirez, I'm really looking forward to them making the tough decision with him. I think it's easy to say, well, he was a catcher in the minors and he'll be a catcher in the major leagues. It is a difficult decision. It is a difficult decision to make him a first baseman. It's a difficult decision to sell to Agustin Ramirez as well. Listen, I'm fully well aware of a guy with identical numbers who plays first base and a guy with identical numbers who plays catcher. Who's going to get paid more? The guy that plays catcher. That's just how it's going to be. But I think the upside of Ramirez playing a different defensive position could make him a much better offensive player. And I think that's ultimately what we will end up seeing down the line. And I think it can kind of kill two birds with one stone, where you're identifying that first base, that long-term first base answer. And then, hopefully guys like Joe Mack can come up and kind of fill in that gap at catcher for the Marlins. The next thing that I did want to touch on here is the Marlins injury bug continues to bite pretty hard. Jansen Junk going down with arm soreness. He's going to be reevaluated. We'll see where he is. Anthony Bender placed on the injured list on August 20th. Now he's all of a sudden out for the season. That's a big blow to the bullpen. Granted, he wasn't pitching much to begin with post All-Star break, and I think that the management of the bullpen post All-Star break has really been an indicator of what they're trying to accomplish in the second half of the season, as I talked about last week. even. I think that they're in evaluation time right now. They're treating this like an extended spring training. August through September here, this is their spring training. They're throwing out guys that I think it's dubious if they make the 2026 roster, to say the least. Guys like Bender or Bender going down, but guys like Bacher, Henriquez, Phillips, even Fauché, not pitching quite as much as they did in the first half, giving those opportunities to Josh Simpson and Valente Belloso and Tyler Zuber. And I know that it's been harped on ad nauseum, but it's really stark, the difference between the Marlins bullpen then and the Marlins bullpen now. And I know I'm not here to short sell Anthony Bender. I know he's been fantastic for the Marlins this season. I know that's a big loss for them out of the bullpen. They lose a little bit more of that depth that they have now, where really you have 4 guys kind of that you trust. 5 maybe if you're counting Gibson, but I don't even know if you count Gibson at this point in that group of guys that you really trust out of the bullpen. The other thing when it comes to the injury bug for the Marlins, obviously we know about Kyle Stowers having gotten hurt. We know about Graham Pauley having gotten hurt. It's just one of those things where, again, I think that this is just the front office kind of providing themselves cover for tanking, in so many words. Again, the players are not trying to lose. The managers are not managing to lose. They just have a different directive from the front office rather than try to win every game today. It is what it is. It's as clear as day. It is as plain to see as can be. And, that kind of leads me into the final thing that I want to touch on here. And again, I've mentioned this is a very calculated risk that they're taking, because they know what they're doing. They know that they're alienating people right now. They know that. They can't be unaware of that. They can't be so disconnected from reality that they believe because they got to 500 that it's going to earn them some sort of, large runway with the fan base. I think they genuinely believe that this is probably beneficial to them somehow in 2026. Whether that's, hey, the season wasn't going to matter that much anyway, so you may as well max out your draft pick, or, well, these are guys at the bottom of the roster that we want to know about for next season. I think that they're going to justify it to themselves in kind of a myriad of ways. But again, I don't think you can ignore the reality that, through this, the Marlins had a lot of momentum that they could have capitalized on. Stowers goes down. He says he feels a tweak in his oblique. He's talking about it post-game. He's like, yeah, well, I was able to take swings and I was all right. But it didn't feel great, the day after. And listen, I'm not in his body. I can't tell you what he feels or what he doesn't feel. But I can't help but be skeptical of the fact that if the Marlins were in a legitimate playoff race and they were actually pushing for a playoff spot, I do think Kyle Stowers would still be on the roster. I still think, I can't really say Bender really. I think that's a legitimate thing. But, the point there being that the Marlins are comfortable with going back down into the basement because they believe that they've earned some sort of equity. I don't think that they've earned that yet. And maybe that doesn't fall into their calculations one bit. Like I said, I said it last week. The Marlins have been making unpopular moves all throughout this entire rebuild. Some have been really good. Some have been really bad. Um, and I think that when you look at everything in its totality, again, this is still a roster where, you know, if you can get a top four in your order of Edwards, Marcy, Stowers, and Ramirez, and Ramirez has, you know, his back going, that's a really formidable top four in the lineup that, you know, can be the foundations of a really solid offense in 2025 or in 2026. But, you know, you're also the same team that you don't know what your bullpen looks like because you don't really have a set closer. Your corner infield spots you don't feel great about right now. We'll see what some of the reinforcements are able to do. Connor Norby looks like he's going to be back probably next weekend for the Marlins. Griffin Conine is in his final return to play stages, so I have to imagine he'll be making himself a rehab starter too in a week or so. Ryan Weathers is finishing up his return to play protocols. I have to imagine he's going to be suiting up in the next week and a half for, you know, some kind of game action. You've got guys like Victor Mesa in the minors. You've got guys like Matthew Wetzel in the minors who are relatively close, who can come up and potentially add a spark for this team. And those are guys that you want to see about as well. You're kind of seeing it with Max Acosta. I mean, Max Acosta, he's showing off that he's got, you know, some really solid pop in his bat at his frame. But at the end of the day, he's not polished enough as a major leaguer to really stick around long term. I think he's still got another season and a half to go at the AAA level before he kind of really hits that potential and it becomes realized for the Marlins and for himself. You know, again, I think you look at this roster and you look at where they are in the long term, and it's easy to get caught up in the whirlwind of what's happening right now. And believe me, it's not fun. This team is continually lifeless. They're not putting out a good product, and it's sending people right back for the exits when you brought them in. And again, I know that that's not why they make the moves that they make. Clearly, they're not making moves just to put fans in the seats. Clearly, that's not what they're doing. That's not what they're about. But you know, I think when you look at their building strategy here, and you look at how it can affect the fan base, yeah, there's going to be increased apprehension because, you know, how do we know when you hit a certain number, you know, you're going to just fade. You know, you're going to decide, okay, well, you know, we banked enough equity here. We've done enough in this 3 quarters of a season to justify kind of mailing it in the rest of the way. And listen, I mean, to their credit, I will give them this. There's a direction. One way or the other, there's a direction. They're not doing this halfway in, halfway out thing. We didn't want to trade anybody, but at the same time, we want to win as many games as possible. But at the same time, you know, we're kind of ambivalent about it. They've chosen a direction. And the direction they've chosen is we're not ready in 2025, so we're going to be as bad as possible to maximize our draft pick. And hope that the return of Stowers and Weathers and Norby and, you know, the emergence of guys like Robbie Snelling, who unfortunately I don't think we're going to see until September at the latest or at the earliest, even with the injury from Jansen Junk. I think Adam Mazur is probably your next man up in the rotation there. But that's where you're looking at, you know, from their perspective, they're going to say, okay, well, we're going to get Stowers back, and we're going to get Weathers back, and we're going to have Snelling coming up, and, you know, White might come up. And again, they could very well be right in that. And if they are, you know, this whole thing pays off for them in spades. But up until that point, it's just going to look like, and I can't fault people for thinking that it is like just a run-of-the-mill we don't care about winning organization. That's what it. That's I can understand. I can fully understand how somebody gets the impression there. I do. I think that they've got a justification for kind of taking their foot off the pedal in 2025. I don't know if I agree with it. I do know that if that's the route that they're going to go, that they better be good in 2026 because, again, you're sacrificing seasons, you're sacrificing years of guys' primes for draft pick at the end of the day. And again, full disclosure, I know that the team itself is not tanking. The players are not tanking. The coaches are not tanking. They want to win baseball games. But again, the directive is let's find out what we have for 2026, whether that be depth or some interesting young players, and get healthy for next season, and we'll see you back in the NL East. That's kind of where I think that they think that they're at. I think it's kind of an arrogant assumption to make that you'll just get better next season because progression is hardly ever linear. You look at what happened to a guy like Adley Rutschman in Baltimore this past season, where one of the best offensive catchers in the game is a below average to average hitter in 2025, and that's where the challenge is going to lie, is winning back the trust of the fan base while also kind of staying true to whatever it is your vision is for this build. And I think that there's a way to thread the needle. I don't think you have to take a sledgehammer to the roster, but it seems like that's kind of the Peter Bendick's Miami Marlins way right now in 2025 is if we cannot really compete, then we may as well be as bad as possible. Again, I fully understand the hardest place to be in sports is in the middle. And I understand, 81 and 81 is not anyone's goal, but there's a difference when you account for projection. If you're going from, if you're flat 80 to 84 wins for 6 years in a row, oh my God, get off that ride immediately. Trade everyone. But if you're going from 16 games under to 500 to, who knows what you're going to be in the next season, then I think that there's something to be said about having that positive momentum and building towards something in the course of your rebuild. But that has been all for me today. My name is Eric Wiedeke. You can follow me on X/Twitter at Eric Wiedeke. More Marlins talk coming next week. The Marlins starting up a 3-game set versus the Blue Jays, versus the Atlanta Braves, as the Braves come into town here looking to take third place back away from the Marlins in the NL East. My name has been Eric Wiedeke. Thank you guys for watching. I will see you next week. Bye-bye.